Welcome to I Hate It Here, the podcast for HR and people professionals, making the hardest job in the world just a little bit easier. I'm Hiba Youssef.
I see AI as something that can actually democratize that access to information and knowledge. Whereas before we had these silos, it's kind of who you knew. Of course, this requires an organization to have their documentation, at least in part, up to a good standard of quality, because bad data in, bad responses out. But if that is in place, giving people the appropriate keys to the appropriate doors will mean that anybody can instantly, 24/7, no matter where you are in the world, it reduces the barrier to entry to access opportunity. I think it can actually help.
Hello, I am back in your ears with another banger of an episode. I have had such an incredible season geeking out with so many incredible guests, and I wanted to go out with a bang. So I brought you my friend Jeet. He's incredibly impressive, a co-founder and a CEO, and building something really freaking cool for HR leaders that I think could revolutionize our work. And I've made this entire season about teaching myself something, and hopefully listeners as well, you learned something. And this season finale is no exception. And every single convo I have with Jeet, I leave with so much food for thought, so many ideas to deep dive on, and a lot of questions to ask HR and myself. So who is my incredible guest? Jeet is the CEO and co-founder of Kinfolk, which is an AI HR assistant for 24-hour employee support. Prior to that, he was the head of product at a work tech company, Hubble, which was acquired, and was the founding product lead of an AI team at Beamery, a talent acquisition and management HR tech unicorn. Before that, he managed and played in bands, worked at Universal Music, published a paper which won an innovation award on using AI to spot talent. I'm really going to need to read that, Jeet. And he lives in London, which I think you could pick up maybe from his accent, although that doesn't feel very good to say on an HR podcast. But Jeet, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I will try and put on my best British accent so it's clear.
Do you get that a lot? Like when people meet you, they're like, oh, is that the first question? Not in London, because I feel like other Brits are like, yeah, this is how we all talk. But I feel like in the US, everyone's like, ooh, an accent.
And I'm going to dial it up for Transform. Actually, in London, they don't think I'm from London. They think I'm from somewhere else, maybe Australia. It depends on how much I've had to drink and who I'm speaking.
Really? I feel like that's a thing where, like, if you're from different areas in London too, your accent is like slightly different, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, just like when you're in America.
Yeah.
I don't really love our accent though. Anyways, okay. This season, I've asked every guest, what's one topic or area you're really interested in? Like, it doesn't have to be about HR. It can be about anything, but I'm genuinely curious to hear from guests what they're focusing on right now.
Yeah. For me, it's AI. I mean, I'm going to say that because my whole world revolves around that piece at the moment. But it's AI in work as a whole, not necessarily in HR. Because even in our company, it's touching every aspect. And when we take a step back and look at the work that we're doing and the size of the team and the hiring that we're thinking of making and why we're thinking of making that hiring, all of it is not dictated, but definitely informed by, could we use AI for this instead? Like it's like the internet, or it's like electricity. It just fuses into everything that we need to get done.
Yeah, it's really interesting. My CEO has been asking everyone to challenge their thinking and ask themselves, is there an AI use case for something they're currently doing? And it's been really interesting because we send our department leaders send a weekly email to each other, like, here are the things going on. And then we have like a weekly meeting. But in the email, people are like, here's a use case I thought of that I'm using AI for. And I'm like, shit, I need to get myself together.
Well,
I need to give them the use cases.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll talk about some examples today.
I can't wait. Okay. So I want to start with your journey into all of this. Like, you've had a really cool career, lots of very different things, really product heavy. And what inspired you to build Kinfolk, and what were the problems you were trying to solve?
Yeah. So both Kim, who's my co-founder, and myself, we get a lot of buzz from seeing people thrive, and particularly seeing people thrive together and be creative together. But not Kim, but I also realized I wasn't as great as a manager as I realized. And really that biggest unlock came when I was able to partner with the HR team and get their advice and guidance on how to level that piece up, because I was a good individual contributor. But then obviously that there's a leap. It's a different role altogether. And we looked at like the biggest barriers of creativity and collaboration. And really it's low level admin. Like if you give people that time and the space, they will figure stuff out themselves. They're smart people. And then we looked at where is the biggest impact that we can have by working with a department that touches every single employee's lives. And that's the people team. And given that we came from Beamery, but where we met, we had the domain expertise, we had friends in HR we spoke with, it became quite a natural fit. We didn't set out to like, hey, let's build a solution for HR teams. It was like, how do we help people do their best work and how do we reach the largest number of people horizontally across an organization? So the mission really became, how do we free up the people who are enabling everyone else in an organization so they can do their best work? And the simplest answer was free up HR teams.
Ugh, I feel that in my soul when I tell you there are days where I get like so boggled down by my admin work where I'm like, I don't want to do this. Like, I want to go focus on this really interesting problem I'm trying to solve, not chase down five different people who needed to tell me one thing so that I could put a piece of paperwork in front of another person and make sure it gets signed, then it has to get uploaded. I'm like, I don't want to do this. I want to go
Yes.
solve a hard problem, not this problem. So when we first connected, like it was really interesting just talking to you, hearing about your career and the things that inspired you, because I also feel like I want to help people do their best work. And there is a lot of barriers for HR people. So what were some of like the biggest challenges you saw HR teams facing when they were just handling employee requests and ops stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting because when we asked HR teams, in reality, it's not like there's this one great thing that we can solve for. No challenge is really too big. The team is a group of people with a diverse set of skills, so they can solve those things. But there's always a time and resource problem, and all these little things, which we call paper cuts, they all build up. Um, and the solution invariably from the C-suite when the business is going really well is just throw more people at it because we can. And then we're going to run more training because we can. And we're going to try and shift accountability and ownership to employees by running more training. And we're just going to swallow the pain and we're just going to continue to be stuck in reactive mode. And then we're spending more time trying to push the training and more time trying to train junior people rather than solving the core problem. So that was one of the biggest challenges, that kind of mindset shift. And then having limited data on what actually employees wanted, and having the interaction with that org to know what people really want and where we can make a difference. And if you don't have that data, and we talk about engagement data, but that isn't really the language of the C-suite either. If we don't have that data, it means that we can't make a good enough compelling case to have that shift, which then feeds into that problem of, well, there's all these tiny paper cuts. It's not already visible to the C-suite. It doesn't matter. Sounds like you need more people. Sounds like we need more training. So the way that we have tried to solve that kind of stuff is, well, from a product background, if we think about work as a product, primarily product teams don't learn from NPS scores. Like that's a one-shot thing. It's a marketing technique primarily, in my opinion. But they learn from people clicking around, i.e. interacting with that product. And they learn from what people are asking customer support. Where are they getting stuck? So naturally, we look at, okay, well, what are employees asking? And that's where they're getting stuck in that process. So that's really why we focus on that piece in terms of what Kinfolk is now, because those are the two biggest problems. And once you have that, then you have the data to see what they're asking for, and you can then fix that stuff as well and build a better business case to get HR people a seat at the strategic table.
Yeah, I have such a like a hot take about data, especially in HR. It feels like we don't have like a core set that everyone has agreed upon is like what we're asking people, but then we're constantly trying to like benchmark experiences against our peers or like ask our friends. And I'm like, none of us have collected data the same way. None of us are like looking at the same data sets. Like I understand why we should ask each other, but at the same time, I'm like, can we all just get together as an industry and decide like these are our three core data points? We're all going to talk about these three. I feel like that's a little unrealistic, but I do think about that quite a bit because it's like, how do we actually figure out what employees want? And that I think is so hard. And I love that you come at it from like, what are they asking? Like, what kind of questions are they asking? What kind of experience are they having? And that can help better inform what we're trying to do. But yeah, the data piece just really resonated with me because I feel like every time an employee slacks me for something that I know that they can find elsewhere, but they don't exactly know how to find it, I honestly get mad at myself. Because I'm like, this is a problem I have created. I'm like a self fulfilling problem over and over again because I could fix this and I don't. And then every time they
Yeah.
Slack me, I'm like, God, why are they Slacking me about this work from home stipend? Like I wrote this whole notion and they could find it if
Yeah.
they could just ask. So
It's the classic thing. And then, having that real tangible data points and then using that to frame the business case to say, 57 people in the last week asked me about this particular thing. This is your employees not only restricting me to get on with productive work, but they're being restricted themselves. And whenever we've asked for a budget in the product team or the engineering team, framing it as, of course, product management efficiency. Yes, one, sure, engineering efficiency, but the ability to deliver features faster to customers so that they can get value has always resonated further with C-suite. So it's kind of like, how do we take those learnings and put it into the employee support piece?
I love that. I think the other interesting piece of this too is like you're automating something necessarily that like I doesn't need a human touch. Like I don't need to be telling people how to spend the work from home stipend. That's like not a good use of my time. It's probably not like a good use of the employee's time to have to come to me to ask that. And so I think about this a lot because we are known as like a human centric function. Like it's in our title, a lot of places, human resources. And I think the hesitation I've seen from a lot of HR people when talking about AI is like, oh, but like that's going to take away the human, the empathy piece of like the work that we do. And I want to talk, I mean, we've talked about it on HR therapy, but I want to talk more about it here. Like, how should we think about AI complementing rather than really replacing this like human piece of HR?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points here, and one that you made at HR Therapy was really good and stuck with me, which is that when we talk about human interaction, it doesn't necessarily mean it's about having a human. It's about allowing them to have a more human interaction themselves, which means it's about reducing their waiting time, which means it's about giving them access to information as quickly so that they can get on with stuff as efficiently as they need to. So I think we probably need to frame what human centric really means because it depends which human we're talking about. If we're talking about the human as the employee, then we don't need a human from the HR side to give them that human experience. And I think the other thing is we should be thinking about AI as a capacity multiplier. I think a lot of people are using things like Gen AI to do things like get insights faster. But then we can also think about it, well, getting those insights faster isn't just for HR, but it's for managers as well. And when they can get those insights faster using generative AI, it means they can have more human, richer conversations with their employees. And then, of course, the stuff that we're working on at Kinfolk is the agents. So the agents can literally go into an HRIS with the right approvals and click the buttons. It can generate the documents. So if we look at an example like a promotion, it's a hybrid use case. You'll have stuff that is very admin heavy, clicking buttons, changing employee data, generating those letters. But then there's the human work, which is making sure that they actually transition into the new role properly. They get the training, they're celebrated for those things, their teams are equipped. So I think if we take away those clicking button moments and generating documents moments, that still frees up people further for actually elevating that person, having the human conversations there. So I actually think AI will help us to be more human centric rather than less going forward.
Yeah, I always come back to that Skynet stupid example. I really have to stop giving it. I'm sure people on this who listen to this podcast are like, stop bringing up the Terminator.
Sponsored by Skynet.
Yes, that's what I thought of when like I really started exploring AI, and I like what you just said really hit home with me because I was just thinking that promotion use case. Like I have typoed in a promotion paperwork before, and I'm like, I am a human typing this, right? Like it got caught. Like I caught it before it went to anyone, but I'm like, if that can happen so easily, and I'm giving so much of my mental energy to like making sure that this thing gets done correctly when like something could automate it and I could actually focus on what kind of conversation am I trying to have with the person in front of me. That use case to me just like, sorry, really hit home. Kind of a little
Yeah,
PTSD because like our promotions process right now, like because we don't automate the paperwork, we like write it. We are small startups. Like I don't have anything to automate anything, but like it goes through a 3-check process. Like I write it, my counterpart reads it, the manager has to also read it. And I just keep thinking to myself, what if all 3 of us have the wrong title, the wrong compensation? What if we just have something wrong? And then that makes it all the way through to the employee and you're handing them something while trying to have a really interesting conversation with them.
exactly.
It's like, that is
Yeah,
just a recipe for failure. That's like a big fail
yeah,
point, honestly.
yeah.
So
There was I don't know if you've seen Superstore. which is on Netflix, which I've been
Yeah.
catching up on recently. And in one of the episodes, Glenn, the store manager, says when he's promoting Amy, it's like, as part of this process, when you fill in this form, you have to check it 7 times, because that catches all the issues. And she only checks it 6 times, and obviously there's an error. And it's a silly example, but exactly to your point, it's like we don't need to check it 7 times. We can just approve the AI to check it once, and it will do it
Yeah.
correctly if it's set up correctly. So yeah, I always come back to that. That just flashes up in my head.
I think about that. I think about that use case. I'm not exaggerating. At least once a month,
Yeah.
because I have sent incorrect paperwork before, and like I'm somebody who is so intense about that. I'm like, employee trust to me is like at an all-time low. I think Minda Harts has a book coming out about this
Mm.
later, where I'm like, we want our employees to trust us, and I think the biggest place we lose trust is when we can't show up in the moments that really matter because we're too distracted by things like paperwork, by things like operations, by things like all the little things that like don't actually require our attention. And what we should be pivoting and focusing on is like the person in front of
Yeah,
us.
totally.
And I like that's why I think every conversation I have with you, I'm like, yes, I see the vision so clearly of like what you're building because it's like a real it's like a real problem for me personally in my own work. And there's been so much buzz about AI. Like I think if I opened a web browser right now, there would be a story about HR, AI, and like a use case. And with that means there's also been like a lot of skepticism around AI and HR. So like I want to talk a bit about misconceptions. Like what's the biggest one you've encountered or a few of the biggest ones you've ever encountered? And how do you actually address those?
Yeah. So there has been a few, and it's all kind of linked. So the first one is that AI will cut staff, and some people use that as a positive thing to make a business case for it, and some people use it as a fear tactic as well. And in reality, it won't. And these aren't my words. It's something that I heard someone else say, and it resonates with me. It won't cut your existing staff, and we're seeing this with our customers as well. It frees them up to focus on more important work. It will reduce the need for future staff, but the point is, with your current employees, think about what else you could do with their freed up time. And obviously that needs to link to business goals, but I think that's a big misconception. So we bring this in, it's an efficiency play, we're going to reduce the HR team by 50%. That's not the business case. So if you're going for that, then I would say don't do that. That's also not going to get you budget necessarily because it's not the truth of what AI can really do for you. Unless you have fluff, unless you've done a lot of hiring that you shouldn't have done. But if you have the right people in place, then it will not cut that stuff currently. I think the other things is that AI will go off Skynet example again and do things that you don't want it to do. And frankly, like it's not that smart. There are guardrails in place. Like
It's
it'll
not
go off
taking
and
over
like
the world.
yeah, exactly. It could go up and like just fire people and like increase the CEO's salary. It's like 5x. It's like it's not how it works. Like there are approval processes in place for a reason, and AI is not replacing that. AI is going and gathering the approvals from people faster, and then it is executing once it has that yes or a no. So those checks and balances are still in place. So we have no harm about Skynet taking over anytime soon. At least not in HR workflows, where things are pretty well controlled. And the other piece is when people think about AI for HR, they think about it internally. It's like, how am I going to use AI to help myself? And what they should be thinking about actually is how can I use AI to extend my capabilities so that it can help employees so that it can free up both them and me. And because when we look at the problems, it doesn't really come back to the problems that the HR team has. The root cause is that employees are getting stuck in a process. So if you give them AI and allow them to self-serve, that solves it both for them and you, as opposed to thinking about Gen AI and how can I use that just to write a job description. So we need to think a bit bigger. That's been a big misconception of how do I make myself more efficient, as opposed to the question should be, how do I make the entire business more efficient by giving them the AI, not just myself?
That's so smart because a lot of times I think small when it comes to AI use cases. Like I dream big, but I'm usually like thinking small. I'm like, write this com for me, do this thing for me. But I was just thinking as you were speaking, like the amount, I wonder if someone's ever added up the amount of times employees have to like go back and forth with someone to get an answer. Or I honestly think I should have started tracking the amount of times I have to remind people to do things is like getting out of hand. We just like did
Yeah.
our we just did our performance reviews, and because I know people delay, I did like 4 sets of reminders, and our process is like tight. It's a 2-week timeline. So I'm like, we have to keep it tight. Everyone knows this is coming. I'll give you everything ahead of time. It needs to get done. But then I still had to remind people up until the day before something was due. And I like had my direct report individually Slack every single person who hadn't finished to be like, hey, did you get this done? I mean, we're small, we're like a 55-person company, but at the same time, I'm like, I just spent 3 hours reminding people to do things. She just spent an hour. Together, we probably could have spent that time doing anything better for the business. A million other things I could have thought of. And so I think that's like, I've been thinking small, and this is really inspiring me to like actually start thinking really big and dreaming really big, because there's a lot of things I do day to day that I think are necessary for the business, but aren't actually helping push the business forward. And I think we have such an opportunity as HR to like help businesses move forward. And I want to be in that role. And I think a lot of people in HR want to be in that role too.
I'm very excited to hear you say that. Yeah, because I think, when we talk about human resources, it is from a business perspective, we're trying to optimize the resources, sure, but we're trying to make sure that the 90,000 hours or so of our lives that we spend at work is spent meaningfully. So if we can allow people to, and people are smart, like no matter what they say, people are smart. They do want to turn up and do good work. So why don't we just enable them to do it by giving them the tools?
I completely agree. Okay, so on the note of data, so like
Yeah.
I'm dreaming about this stuff, right? But every HR person listening, like we all have like a good amount of healthy doubt. I would just like to say, like as HR people, like we're reasonable, we have some doubt about things. And if we're saying like AI can really improve our efficiency for HR teams, what data do you have to like really support that? Because I think someone listening to this could then go to their C-suite and advocate for the tools they need if they have like some really good data points on how they're actually being leveraged day to day.
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you some anecdotes as well as some harder stuff. So um, what Kin does is it can handle up to 70% of requests end to end, as long as it's integrated. And that's really key because it can handle it end to end rather than just create another ticket. So you're obviously going to have that 30%, which should be probably handled by humans in any case. And there's going to be something that's going to slip through the cracks. So we're never going to promise that we'll handle everything, nor do we want to. But that 70% typically translates to we're seeing teams save the equivalent of 1.5 days a week that they would otherwise spend doing that kind of work. And this is the full platform. So this is not just the answering the questions and updating HR records or generating letters, but it's also we have push notifications. So imagine that you launch a new benefits program, and then you create materials around it, and then you do an all hands, and you put it in your resource hub, and you say, "Hey, go read it." And then 2 weeks later, a manager's like, "Yo, where's that thing?" So what Ken can do is it can push those communications around those key moments out based on specific audiences. So it's tailored. And then that manager can then ask Ken that question in line with that communication in place. So all the information is there and it's all pulling from your knowledge hub. So it's almost like program orchestration, which allows for that 1.5 days a week to be solved. And we're seeing, for example, Vidyard and Corella on this side of the pond, see those kind of things. The other piece of anecdotal feedback that we've had is we send out a survey to employees, and because they're getting much more proactive support and instant answers, they scored the satisfaction of 9.5 out of 10. And we looked at the difference from previous hires and new hires as a use case. And because their managers were enabled, and because the new hires are able to self-serve themselves and get that proactive enablement, they were super happy. So we stayed away from measuring things like service time, because of course that's going to go down from hours to minutes, but what is the actual outcome for the employee? That's what really matters. So that's what we looked at. And then the other piece of anecdotal data is that while it doesn't cut back on existing staff, nobody got fired, which I'm proud of. What it does do is that it means that you can scale your HR team effectively infinitely. So we've had a couple of cases where they've had to let go or reduce their HR team, or the HR team has shifted because of acquisition. And they haven't needed to hire anybody else, or they've hired someone on a lower salary because the AI is handling the other stuff.
Yeah. I'm just listening to this and I'm like, this is like every CFO's dream. It's like, you're like, there's this tool I'm using that like will enable us to do all these other things and support all of our employees and get better outcomes from the business. And I'm just like, I was listening to you say that and I was like, wow, I can think of like 3 CFOs right now that would be like, oh my God, how do I get this tool? Because it's such a brilliant function and it is solving a actual real problem we have every day. Like all the things that you were talking about like open enrollment, the amount of times I had to remind people, you need to select your healthcare or you will not have healthcare. And we still had 2 people miss the deadline. And I was like, would you like insurance? Yes, no. Because if the answer is yes, you better fill this out right now. And I like,
Yeah.
thankfully, our brokers, we like set a different deadline and our brokers have like a window of like another week after to don't, hopefully none of my employees are listening to this because now they know my tactic. But people still missed it. And I'm thinking about all these things. Like I also spend a lot of like emotional bandwidth as an HR person worrying about these examples and trying to solve for them ahead of time. Being like, oh, I know this manager is not going to get these things done in time. He's always the last manager to get it done. So ahead of time, what I'm going to do is remind them 3 or 4 times, reach out, be like, hey, how can I help you? Maybe read this document that I wrote for all of you.
Wow.
And I'm thinking about that and I'm like, what if I didn't have to do that?
Yeah.
Like you said, 1.5 days back to my life, like then I could focus on some like really tough challenges we're trying to solve as we're thinking about like, how do we grow and scale our organization and what does our workforce plan look like? And internally, how are we moving people around? Because those are the things that like AI can never really do for me. I like know the humans, I know their talents, I know their traits, I know their managers. I'm trying to figure out how to build like the best next set of teams. I don't really need to be reminding managers to do things.
Exactly. And we're not there yet, but I think in future, and there are systems. I know Beamery's been thinking about this as well, where it can learn the communication preferences of a particular individual. So exactly what you just said there. Hey, this manager invariably misses, and we have an overdue status tracker. So in future, there's nothing to say that, well, exactly the thought that you had, that we need to make sure that this manager is reminded up front to make sure they don't miss it. I think those are some of the use cases that are really exciting for me because then you can really tailor the communications. So yeah, I think that's coming.
That is such a cool use case because I'm just thinking I did an episode on like how we're in the age of personalization, how everybody wants like I open my Netflix, it tells me exactly what to watch. I pull up my Spotify, it recommends exactly the songs I know I'm going to love. Like some days I'm like, damn, the Spotify algorithm is so good because it like serves me songs. I'm like, damn, the song's so good. Why don't I know this song? And I'm like so into it. I found like so many new artists and I'm like, I cannot wait until we do that for the world of work where if we know this manager is late, like do they get more touch points? If we know this manager is struggling to give feedback, do we serve them content or direct them towards content to help improve their feedback giving potential?
Exactly. I think it's super exciting, and I'm excited to see what some of these large players, hi Bob, they're in such a good place and they sit on so much great data. I think it's just a matter of time until we get to that one-to-one, one scale personalization.
I'm such a fucking dork because I'm so excited right now. I'm about to leave and like come up with like 10 use cases for you to be like, Jeet, you have to think about these 10 things because you're right. We're sitting on so much data and like I don't think I transact on like half our data that I have, honestly. And I even talked to my CEO about it. We did my performance review this week. And I was like, hey, I wrote in my performance review an area that I want to focus for the rest of the year is leveraging our data to like build better programs for the company. And he was like, what do you like? Why did you put this in here? And I was like, because I'm sitting on so much data that I want to do something with. And I want to like actively think about how do we better serve these employees who are telling us things optionally too, because we can do pulse surveys. And don't you think they want to know what we're doing with the things they're telling us? So I could geek out about this forever. And I'm definitely going to send you like 16 Slacks after this podcast. Okay. Back to our HR AI never ending conundrum. I think one concern most HR people have, and I definitely do, is like AI's ability to like read between the lines. Like things like tone, first of all, is so hard to ascertain via text, but also like sentiment in the employee requests. Like that employee who asked me can I spend my work from home? Like, was he upset with me? I don't know. I don't think AI can figure that out either. But like, how do you think about that as you're building product at Kinfolk? Can AI ever handle the nuance and the meaningful response part?
Yeah, it's a super fascinating question. I think it will get there eventually. And there is like tone recognition that's happening. And because I think that's then reflected into the voice agents that are being created. But we currently intentionally don't handle that. We kind of think about Kin as a junior AI HR coordinator. So anything that is that nuanced is above its pay grade. So we have a flag that says this is a sensitive topic, and you can instruct Kin to say if anybody talks about these particular topics, then don't even talk about it straight away. Like don't answer. This is not for you. You need to escalate it, and because of the org chart and the HRIS, and because of the people team and who manages who, it can escalate it to the right person. So you can of course set the tone of voice so that it responds empathetically. But then beyond that, we say this is not for Kin, escalate or loop in the relevant person. And then when you loop them in, they have a full view of existing, current, and past conversations that that person has talked about. So they can then summarize that and understand what's actually going on. I think a great platform for handling those use cases for employee relationships, as you know, is All Voices. So I think that's where we kind of hand off. Like we handle the admin stuff, and anything that's too sensitive, we would say, hey, let's let humans do it. We shouldn't even look at it yet.
Yeah. Does Kin live in Slack yet? Like when you're thinking about this HR agent, like where, let's say I'm an employee, walk me through, like I want to interact with the AI. How do I go do it?
Yeah. So for anything that's a bit more sensitive that you want to ask it, it's in Slack, it's in Teams, it's via SMS, and it's also within emails connected to the help desk. So depending on the size of the organization, it can then flip on that medium. Primarily, though, we're seeing people are focusing on Slack and Teams. But as we head towards more people, frontline workers, then SMS is going to become pretty crucial.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm really thinking about that use case that just happened to me this week. Like, can I spend my work from home stipend? I'm like, if they could open up Slack and ask, can it be branded, or is it like it is Kin? We don't talk about it in either way.
Oh no, yeah, it's fully. You can replace Kin with any other name that you want to give it. So you can even call it, Heba 2.0. And
oh my God, that'd be so funny. My employees would die laughing at this.
So
The
yeah,
Heba clone?
you can have a clone exactly, and you can put it in it can be like an app that they can interact with, or it can be in a channel. So you just go in the channel, for example, if people are comfortable to ask it public questions, hey at Heba clone, and then ask a question, and then it has default answers in the background. So if invariably people are going to ask you some random stuff, so you can actually have some responses to be like, hey, this is, for example, above my pay grade, or this is actually not something that I should be answering, or
LOL, ask the real Heba, please. Like,
exactly.
I would totally put that in here. It was funny because my CEO just brought up, he asked me if I had looked at the Slack AI tool. And I was like, no, I haven't. And he was like, oh, well, Slack AI can search, any conversation as long as the person has access to it and can give an answer. And I was like thinking about it because he was like, don't you think like we could really use this? And I was like, but our important documents don't even live in Slack. And like we do all of our written comms in email, and like a lot of our stuff is in our HRIS. And so like Slack AI seems cool, but like if you were to ask me, HR person, what I'd rather use, like I'd rather use an AI agent that can talk to our HRIS, like has access to confidential systems, like knows what to say and what not to say. Like even something simple as like onboarding is like the most interesting and easy use case for, I think, anyone to understand. It's like we send out like 50 comms when someone onboards, and they're all custom and sent by my people ops person. So I literally keep telling her, like, imagine you never have to send any of these again. What would your day be like? And every time she's like, that would be the best day of my life. And I'm like, okay. So
There you go. Yeah. And
there we go.
And you hit the nail on the head. I think Slack AI is really good. And there's a couple of other tools. I know Jira has an AI tool as well that plugs into Slack that can pull up information from Jira and Confluence. And it can create tickets as well, which is great if you're a Confluence user. But invariably, it means that it can't personalize things and there's no human in the loop. And for that, you need to have employee record data from the HRIS. You need to be able to, like the questions that HR teams get, we see that 10 to 20% is actually just the basic questions. The other 70 to 80% is doing the work like going into HiBob and clicking buttons. Whereas if you can combine all the information together, knowledge base, Slack information, HRS records, and other platforms, then you have something that can actually do the work for you and deliver value rather than just surface information that doesn't answer questions really.
Yeah, it's wild to me because like if my CEO came to me and was like, let Slack AI access our HRIS, I'd be like, over my dead body.
Yeah.
There's no way. Like the security gaps in Slack of you being able to search things and find previous conversations, maybe with your name in them, if you have the right admin access. I'm like, there is no way
Yeah. You
you
got to have the
could
right
convince me
permissions.
to. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
You got
also
to have
just
the
like, there are also conversations and things that should not happen in Slack. This is maybe a hot take. I'm not saying I'm not saying have more meetings. I'm not saying create more work, but like there are things that are very serious that should not be a Slack conversation. Just like I
yeah.
also don't think like AI meeting recorders should be in every meeting.
Wholeheartedly agree. Yes. Some of the
Like,
best conversations happen when there is no meeting recorder.
yeah, I'm like, someone's going to say something, then it's going to be in writing. Now we have like a whole record of it. I don't want that. The other, sorry, I could go on a tangent about that one because I once had a friend tell me that she like this has been an HR horror story that's been submitted to me multiple times where somebody has left the meeting, they've talked about the person in the meeting, and then the meeting notes have been sent to the person.
Oh, that's painful.
I had multiple HR horror stories submitted about that, and I'm like, can we all just learn from this that we should not be doing this all the time? I want to spend some time talking about like AI in the sense of everyone kind of when we first started talking about use cases, everyone was like, AI is biased, like, look at how it answers all these things. But I think there's this idea that I've been thinking about lately is like, can you use AI to foster something more equitable and inclusive of a workplace? And is there any way you think AI could actually remove bias in our operations?
Yeah. I mean, I see AI as something that can actually democratize that access to information and knowledge. Whereas before we had these silos, it's kind of who you knew. Now, of course, this requires an organization to have their documentation, at least in part, up to a good standard of quality, because bad data in, bad responses out. But if that is in place, giving people the appropriate keys to the appropriate doors will mean that anybody can instantly, 24/7, no matter where you are in the world, no matter the differences in how good your English is, introverts can ask those questions without having to awkwardly worry about whether they're interrupting someone or not. So I actually think when you combine that with something that we built, which we're calling workflows, to your point, there's going to be human error in those workflows. There's going to be a letter that's generated incorrectly. There's going to be we keep hearing about this use case where, hey, someone's been promoted, but their job title isn't correct, or their payroll information has been updated, which means that their salary is wrong this month. And then you suddenly start to think, wait, did they do that on purpose? Is it because, I have an Indian name? And like all these things start to come up, right? And so when you have something that creates an AI-powered workflow, it minimizes those risks of those doubts and those mistakes happening because it's more consistency invariably. And it's also more reportable and auditable, so you can go back and track it to see if something failed, where did it fail. So I think because of all those reasons, because of a better process, because it reduces the barrier to entry to access opportunity, I think it can actually help.
Having your processes documented is the first step in creating an equitable and inclusive environment. Could go blue in the face from the amount of times that people are like, oh, we don't document our promotions process. I'm like, then how do people get promotions? Like, how do you ensure it's fair? Like, how do you ensure the employees understand? Because like, Lord knows you changed one person's role. 6 people are like, where's my promotion? I'm doing great work. Don't I deserve a different? And I'm just like, oh, this is not good.
Exactly.
This is not
Exactly.
good.
I was told by someone very close to me recently, and they were told by their mentor that, because she was like, hey, I'm doing really great work. So, the promotion keeps getting pushed back. And her mentor told her, you've completely misunderstood. It's not about great work. It's about building relationships with leaders and working to their styles. And that's how you get promoted. There is nothing documented. This is one of the largest professional services companies out there. It's global and they're making billions of revenue, and this is how they function. So it's pretty crazy how documentation doesn't exist and how that feeds, to your point, so much bias in the process and lack of transparency.
Yeah, so you want me to kiss your ass so I get a promotion,
Yeah.
not because I'm actually qualified and I've done all the great work. Like, sorry, I was anyone listening. I was like making a terrible face while he was telling that story because I was like, I would literally say to my mentor, like, I'm not doing that. I don't.
Yeah.
I hate the game. This like game of like politicking to get what you want at work is
Yeah.
literally just another form of the old boys club.
And guess exactly what's happening. I'm just very passionate about this piece because it's a very raw story. Um, she's been hired as a group of women of color who's been brought into middle management. And what has happened is because it's an old boys club, the entire cohort of people that have been brought in with her, they have all left or been fired because they didn't know how to politic within the system. Whereas the folks that were in there from the beginning, um, tenure type stuff, they have been continuing to get promoted. So on the surface, they're like, hey, we are women forward, we're equitable. But in reality, it doesn't last. Crazy.
If you're going to talk the talk, you better walk the walk. If
Absolutely.
somebody said you have to politic to get a promotion, I would literally be like, fuck you. Like, well, I'll just say because this is my podcast. And like I have been told before, like very early in my career, I had a mentor who was a man and he was like, you're too direct, you're too honest. It's Women's History Month, so I have a post going live about this. You're too direct, you're too honest, you're too intense, and
Mm.
people don't like that about you. You should be softer and smile more.
Wow. I actually
And
said
I was
that.
like, yeah. I was like, first of all, I don't like smiling. Like that's just like it's a thing. I'm a soft smiler. I don't smile with my teeth
Yeah.
very often. And second of all, I don't like I'm not mean to people if I'm direct and honest. Like now I feel like that was like almost 10 years ago. Now it's like everyone's the Brene Brown clearest kind. So I'm really like peaking right now because I'm like, yes, I can be direct and honest with people and people not think like, oh, she's an asshole because she just tells it like it is. But like 10 years ago, it was very much like play the game, be nice to people, learn like their
Nuts.
life and all these things and compliment them. And that's how you get promoted. I'm like, I have no space for that. That's
Yeah.
inequitable. Also, that's just like now you're playing a popularity game. You're not playing a capability game. And I don't like that at all. So there's that. Okay. Before I get too off track, because I feel like you and I might have to actually do a separate episode about that another
Yeah.
time. You'll have to come back and we can
We'll do
rant
it.
about like inequity in the workplace. I love wrapping every episode with like a little bit of future and then closing and takeaway. So I'm going to pose a question for you. If we think big, like a bold what if scenario for AI in HR, what is something groundbreaking, no pressure, that you'd love to see happen?
Yeah, I think it goes back to our idea of personalization. And we've so far with HR technology been trying to, when we say personalization, it's still about mass outreach and reaching as many people as possible. Whereas I think with AI, what we can actually do is mass one to one. And what I mean by that is we can give every person a HEPA clone. We can give every person their own HR person. And I think Lattice hinted at this, but it was a bit of a PR failure. The digital twin idea. I don't think you need an HRS record for that AI team member. But I think if you can give every person their own HR person, and then the HR person then becomes a manager of those agents, I'd love to be able to see that because it's not going to take away the human work, but it means that everyone has access to HR instantly and 24/7 at the same level of quality that they would expect when reaching out to a human, at least for the administrative work and at least for the basic information that already exists.
Yeah, that's like very customized, very personalized, definitely where like I think everything is going. If we laser in, like maybe on the next 5 to 10 years, where do you see the future of AI powered HR tools heading?
Yeah, I think we're going to move away from the phrase of AI powered in the same way that we had like digital transformation as a thing where
Yeah.
people were like, or like, are we going from on premise to cloud? I think that will happen with AI as well, where everything will just have AI infused in it, and it will become another feature within the platform. Tasks will get smaller. We'll have data faster. We will expect it. To be available to us when we're doing anything and everything. And I think interfaces will become a lot more conversational. And it will be less about doing the work itself and more about the AI asking us, are you happy for me to proceed? So I think that's definitely, it's already here in some ways. And then people become more approvers and decision makers and people who make judgments about things, rather than sitting there and actually doing that work. So I think we're going to stay away from, I think the UI of an HRS is drastically going to change. The data model in the background is going to be the exact same, but I think how we interact with that data model is going to be pretty different.
God, I'm so excited for this. Like, the future of work, I hate that saying, but I actually do really get excited about how work could look different. But I think the hard part is, like, we have so much potential to go before we actually get there. Like, what do you think is the biggest hurdle in getting an HR team to adopt these AI powered tools? Like, that future sounds great. What do you think is stopping us?
I think it's really not fully understanding what it can do. And if someone doesn't understand what it can do, it's really hard to link it to business impact. So if we're just thinking about something as generative AI and therefore something that I can use myself, we're going to lose out against other AI priorities within the business. For example, there's a lot of talk about using AI in sales processes, and you can create AI. For example, Vidyard, one of our customers, you can create clones of yourself, very, very accurate videos that you can then scale personalized outreach with. And that is not necessarily something that you're doing yourself internally, for example, writing a job description, but it's about scaling yourself externally to your employees. So I think the biggest hurdle is really understanding the capabilities fully. Until we do that, until we start experimenting with it ourselves, and until we stop thinking about it as another piece of software and think about it more, what if I had an extra team member? What could I do with that team member? I think that's going to be the real game changer for people.
So much I could do. I love ending on like a piece of advice. What advice do you have for HR people who are trying to stay ahead of AI powered, this future of work that you and I have just like dreamed up this whole episode? What advice do you have for those people? They're listening to this episode. They're like, great, I want it.
Yeah.
What would you tell them?
I think just try it. I think spend that $20 a month, pay for ChatGPT, or Claude, or whichever you prefer. Because until you do that, until you invest yourself, and until you ask the question when you see some inefficiency of actually, could we not do X differently? I think we're not going to make too much progress, because I think we have a real opportunity in the HR function, given that we touch the entire employee base, of really driving that conversation. But we can't drive that conversation until we try it ourselves, until we can show the value it brings, and therefore give us that creative fuel to understand what it can do for us.
Yeah, I really want listeners to like leave this episode thinking about like, what if we just completely did every single process, every single thing we did differently a year from now, a month from now? Like, there's so much opportunity. Even asking ChatGPT, here are my current processes. What would you recommend improving? How can I automate this work?
Exactly. How can I use you to automate this work? Start with that, and then think further and further. Use AI as your sparring partner.
Jeet, as always, you've given me, again, so much food for thought, back to my original intro to this episode, but so many things I want to go dream about after this episode. I feel like really grateful you've spent time with me, that I get to know you, that I get to see the cool things you're building. For anyone who's listening and is just super inspired by what's happening, how can they get in touch with you? And I'll link it all in the show notes as well. I always say that too.
Awesome. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's really where I'm most active. And other than that, there's a Calendly link on the website, kinfolkhq.com. And if you click on Meet Kin, you're actually meeting me. So sorry for the disappointment, but you can find some time and I will show you Kin, and then we can also have a chat.
I love that. Thank you so much for making
Thanks
time
for tuning in. Keep up with all the latest HR resources by subscribing on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen. And if you love I Hate It Here, tell an HR friend. I'll see you next time.